Last week we introduced the word to you, metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about our thinking. Metacognition is very important in reading because it helps us comprehend the words on the page. So I'm going to demonstrate to you again my metacognition or my thinking as I'm reading today. We're going to continue with the story, The Sisters Grimm, the Fairy Tale Detectives by Michael Buckley. And if you remember from last week, we were introduced to Sabrina and Daphne, whose parents disappeared. The police investigated the disappearance. They searched the family's New York City apartment for clues, and they interviewed neighbors and co-workers. They dusted for fingerprints and filed reports, but Henry and Veronica Grimm had vanished into thin air. Months later, the police found their abandoned car deserted in a lonely park 50 miles north of the city. The only clue was a blood-red handprint on the dashboard that turned out to be paint, but didn't lead to anything else. The investigation came to a dead end, and the cops eventually gave up their search. Wow, I am thinking and wondering where they've gone to and why they would have disappeared and who would have taken them. The girls were placed under the care of social services at first. A nice but overworked man named Todd searched for a next of kin, that is someone who could take them in. But he came up as empty as the police, so nobody to take care of them. No aunts, no uncles, no grandparents, brothers, sisters, or even distant twice removed cousins existed. Todd promised to keep trying, but then Sabrina and Daphne were moved to an orphanage and they never saw him again. Sabrina shook off the sad memories and tucked her long blonde hair behind her ear. She felt like crying, but she couldn't let her sister see her blubbering. She needed to be the strong one. After all, she was almost 12 years old. Wow, I'm thinking to myself how young she is to be left all alone. Sabrina is, and I'm also making a mind movie, and that really helps us comprehend a story when we think about the characters in the story. And so far we've been introduced to Sabrina, who's 12, who has long blonde hair, and then Daphne, who is 7 years old. Not that Daphne would have noticed at the moment. Sabrina's 7-year-old sister had her face pressed against the train's window, as she had for the entire 2-hour trip. She marveled at each ugly little dot on the map they rolled through, like they were Paris, Rome, Los Angeles. She only took occasional breaks from the view to ask questions about their destination. "Do they have bagels in Ferryport Landing, Miss Smirt?" Daphne asked the woman sitting across from them. I'm wondering who is Miss Smirt. And they're sitting on a train, I know that, but I didn't know that she was there until they had just introduced this third character. Miss Minerva Smirt was the girls' caseworker from the orphanage. She was a pinch-lipped, humorless woman in her 50s. As usual, her hooked nose was buried in a book, and Sabrina knew she was reading only so she wouldn't have to talk to them. Whenever they give a description of a character, I try to make a mind movie or a visualization of that character in my mind. So Minerva Smirt is older, she has a hooked nose, and she's pinch-lipped. So I'm thinking that must mean like that, which makes her look kind of mean. Miss Smirt looked up at Daphne with an annoyed scowl and sighed as if the little girl's questions were more than she could bear. Scowl is like a frown. "Of course they have bagels. They have bagels everywhere," Miss Smirt snapped. "Not on the moon," Daphne replied matter-of-factly as she returned her gaze to the window. Miss Smirt snarled and Sabrina snickered. That's when you giggle a little. It was so easy to get on the woman's nerves, and Daphne was particularly good at it. Smirt had made a terrible mistake when she chose a career working with children, Sabrina thought, especially since she didn't seem to like them. The woman complained when she had to touch their sticky hands or wipe their runny noses or reading bedtime stories. That was completely out of the question. She seemed to especially dislike the Grimm sisters, labeling them rude, uncooperative, and a couple of know-it-alls. So Sabrina was sure it was Miss Smirt's personal mission to get the girls out of the orphanage and into the foster home. So far she had failed miserably, sending them to live with people who were usually mean and occasionally crazy. Some used them as maids and house sitters, while others just plain ignored them. This time, however, Smirt had gone too far. This time she was sending them to live with a dead woman. So now I have many questions in my mind about who Miss Smirt is sending them to live with, and also it seems to me I'm noticing that they must have been to a lot of different homes that didn't work out. So as you can see, I'm thinking about my thinking as I'm reading, and it helps me understand what's happening in a story. So today, for your reading log submission, I want you to do your 30 minutes reading, which you have to do every day. Write the title and the author, just like we did last week in the reading log. But then you need to add a sentence sharing your thinking about your reading. You can use the sentence stems that are in your reading log that we wrote last week. In your reading notebook that we wrote last week. I'm wondering, I'm thinking, I'm noticing, I'm visualizing, or I'm feeling. You can use one of these to start your sentence that will share with us what your thinking is in your reading today. I want you to do that today, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. The one that you do on Thursday will be for a daily grade. Happy reading!